So you are completely dialed in with the bosses down there.
Absolutely.
They know what's going on in your territory.
Absolutely.
And you have carte blanche to tell them, hey, I need help. And they'll send hitters up.
Absolutely.
Wow, my God.
You know, I grew up around Chapo and them before they were bosses. You have to understand our history goes back 40 years.
Yeah.
And so when you have a relationship that long, as your friends down in that country become more developed and larger, you're one of them. You are your compadre, your paisan, your family.
You're a peer. You came up together.
Yeah, you came. They remember.
Wow.
We'd sit around and smoke doobies and laugh about the old days when we were all kind of broke and things weren't going real good. And you know, as we're sitting poolside in their mansions full of prostitutes and pounds of cocaine laid out on the coffee tables, and everybody but us getting high.
So you didn't get high?
Oh hell no! Pat and I were taken to a ranch outside of La Tuna. La Tuna is a town that Chapo was born and raised in. And I flew down to Culiacan with Pat. They asked us to come down, and we were wanting to negotiate to get more kilos north. So that's what we thought the meeting was about. And as I explained in my book, they drove us out of Culiacan, took us up in the mountains to La Tuna, and then at a ranch probably 15 to 20 kilometers south of La Tuna. And we've on this ranch, and we see this guy bound in the middle of a corral, and we see all these young sicarios or kids around the corral. And the two soldiers grab me and Pat, and they take us over to the corral. And then they let in 3 Rottweilers, and they ate this guy alive right in front of us. And the ranch owner, the boss, the jefe, he came out and called us into his house, and he says he was wearing a lot of gold jewelry. He was driving new cars. He was putting himself out there where he was drawing attention. So if you want to keep buying gold chains and driving new cars, the next time we call you down here, you're going to be in the corral. And that's a true story. That's how the cartel started changing. This is the Medellin University concept that was coming into play at that time. You know, we witnessed multiple executions. I remember having dinner at certain ranches where I would see bound people load into the back of the truck, hear the crack in the distance, and 30 minutes later, they're coming back, sitting at the same table with me eating dinner. I've driven under bodies in Juarez that were dangled off overpasses that were mutilated and hacked up, and sitting there on the phone talking to somebody. Oh, I got to move the car a little so I can get it by the bodies that are hanging under here. I grew up at that time that the violence became real.
Yeah. Now, when you saw something like that, had your moral compass now started to, flash red, so to speak?
Well, I'm not going to confess or cop to any crime that could come back and haunt me.
No, I'm not asking about that.
But what I'm going to say is this. I had already gone through certain stages of my life where there are things that I had to do to stay alive. And in those actions, let's just leave it at that.
Yeah, I was just asking about...
I was 27 years old when I became a trusted member of the family as a result of something they made me do.
Okay. And I asked that because later we're going to talk about your decision to turn on everything and everyone. And
bear in mind, you're not talking to a chivato here. You're not talking to a rat. I didn't get caught and arrested and decided to tell on people to save myself. You're talking to somebody that made a clear decision and was laser focused on taking on an enemy far greater than himself.
But there had to be a moral or some kind of higher purpose for that.
There was a baby crawling across the living room floor with a bottle dangling out of his mouth. That was when I walked in.
Wait, can you explain that further?
That was my firstborn child. And I wasn't going to raise my children up into this. And years later, before I walked in, we were in Mexico at that wedding. Actually, that's when my wife lost her love for me, and we ended up being divorced over it. She never knew what I was. I never talked about my business to my family. She just knew that I was doing very, very good in the antique business and all this real estate, and things were wonderful. And I was required to take her to the wedding, and that's when she saw who I really was. And I watched the love leave her eyes. And then they told her when our son would be 12, that they wanted him to come to Culiacan, and they would put him in school, and they would make him the next blonde-haired, blue-eyed generation. Right. And she told me, I'll kill you if you do that to our child. You will die for that.
And that's what started turning you emotionally? away
Well,
from.
yeah, he was
the
still
life?
a baby. He wasn't 12. They were telling her when he
I
was
know,
12.
but all of this, do you think
that was
had,
part of the decision, and
Yeah.
the fact that I'd already made mine. I was financially set for life, and I didn't want to live that life anymore. But the problem with it, you're talking about a bunch of us who were peasants. We were kids in our youth that had nothing. And once you start getting rich and wealthy and powerful, you don't want to give that up. I wasn't of that mentality. I was very content with working, building my companies, raising my children out of a crime life element. Do you remember me telling you before the interview that my brothers and sister have all been legitimate all of their lives, very straight, very decent people? I'm the only one that walked that path.
Did they know what you were doing before you went down the first time when you did your state bid in Folsom? Did they have any
They knew.
knowledge of your activities? They did.
They knew, and they all kept me out of their lives. I wasn't allowed to be part of my own family.
Did that affect you?
Very much. Still does to this day. I've still got a sister and a brother that totally keep their distance from me as a result. Yeah, all these years. But
What about John?
John is my hero. We keep in touch, but from a distance.
I see.
John was a man of great honor. He's a highly decorated Purple Heart recipient from the Vietnam War. Did 23 years in the Corps after that. He's just a highly distinguished, very honorable man. And though he, I'm sure, loves his brother, I don't think he can ever forgive what I became. He saw things. He would come home on leave and walk into my house, people strapped with weapons and stuff going on. And he knew that I was a bad person at that time, a dangerous person.
Do you think that was one of your biggest losses? Everybody loses something in this game. Would you consider your relationship with your family to be one of the bigger L's?
Now, I'm going to share something with you I've never shared. The greatest betrayal and greatest loss I've ever felt, and I'll never forgive myself, was having to take down a lifelong friend of mine that goes all the way back, and knowing that I had to take him down in order to accomplish my mission and what I had set myself to do. That will never leave me.
Who was that?
I'm not going to say his name out of respect.
Who was he? Was he a gringo or a Mexican?
Probably 10 miles from where we're at right now. 15 maybe, tops.
Was he a friend from
Mexican
Okay.
from Mexico.
Got it.
A child. Oh, wow. My age, but we were children.
Right. And did he end up doing life, or
No,
did he turn himself around after he got out?
No, we were sentenced together the same day. They gave him 15 years, which was a blessing. Gave his son-in-law 18. And I got my sentence from life mandatory all the way down to 8 years as a result of the work that I had done for the Department of Justice.
So I have to push back a little bit just because that's what I do. And it's out of love.
Please feel free.
You say you had to take a guy down to accomplish your mission, but wasn't that really just to save yourself?
No, not at all. And I'm glad that you're asking it that way, and I thank you for that respect.
Sure.
The reason he ended up getting taken down, and I tried to stop him from coming stateside, the reason he got taken down is because we were so intertangled through phone call communications, DEA photographs of us being together in the United States. There was just too much on him. And what I did do, and God forbid me for saying this now, is I did try to alert him. I went to Culiacan and said, brother, you're already a multi-millionaire. Please stay down here. We have federal heat. And it was right after that when I walked in.
Wow.
So I tried to save him, but I didn't. And when the commitment came, this is where the military comes in you as a young man, and you're trained in certain ways that your comrades have to be able to trust you as much as you trust them with their lives. And that was the mentality I took on when I made the decision to walk in and go after an enemy that wasn't going to give me my life.
Right.
You see, when you fight something as powerful as a drug cartel, you better have a bigger baseball bat. And who bigger than the Department of Justice, who have been chasing me for the last few years as the primary target of the Pacific Northwest. I knew that I had a chip to play in the poker game.
Right. But you did have heat on you.
Yeah, I had a law enforcement agent, narcotics division in Seattle on my payroll. So, yeah, I was getting reports when my people were being monitored or observed, federal involvement, things like that. So I had him on there for about 2 years.
So this cop was feeding you information about the DEA activity?
A high-ranking cop. Yeah, a high-ranking cop.
Can you tell us about him?
Yeah, he was a lieutenant grade. He worked narcotics division, Seattle PD. I had a guy that worked for me that was moving a lot of cocaine in the Seattle area, and he actually grew up with this officer. And Mike O'Day is the name of the guy that knew him. Mike is dead, so I don't mind telling you. Mike owes me $250,000. But
Maybe you collect after you leave this earth.
Yeah, it's all good. But Mike put me together with this lieutenant. I never met the lieutenant. I never saw him. He never saw me. Mike was our go-between for everything. And what he would do is he would print off sheets that came right out of his department, so I could see the stationery and letterhead. I could read the intel regarding the surveillance and that. And then I had to burn it right in front of Mike O'Day. Mike would photograph me burning up his sheets, so there was nothing evidentiary that could ever take that.
Right. And how much were you paying for that information?
Thousands.
Yeah.
I would say a minimum $2,000 for a sheet, but I probably paid him $90,000 in less than 2 years.
Yeah.
It wasn't cheap.
And it never came back on this lieutenant.
I knew. I didn't know who he was.
Yeah. Right.
That was my story, and I'm sticking to it. You know?
How did it work in the structure in terms of payments? Were you consigned a certain amount? Say it's 1,000 kilos. Is that a typical order from the
what I would
Culiacan,
pay,
or?
what I would pay him was I'd pay him what I felt the information was worth. And
I'm sorry to interrupt. I meant for the product, for the merchandise. Trying to get a sense of how the structure worked. Were you cash on delivery when you were buying, or?
Oh no, this is me. I didn't pay a penny up front. Everything was brought to me.
Yeah.
And I had absolute trust, of course. These are my childhood friendships, you know.
Right. And so then your customers, are you just giving it to one guy? Is he doing the distribution, or how did that work?
No, I had over 30 people in my employ at that time. And the people that worked for me, I only had 3 lieutenants that directly dealt with me personally. Right. And they were all under a guaranteed death sentence if anything happened to me. Right. They were informed that, and they knew that. They witnessed death, so they knew that they were involved in a very serious game. So the bottom line is I was totally shielded even by distributors. And years later, people go, oh, yeah, you were moving 200-300 kilos. And, yeah, we were buying your kilos, so you got to know this guy and that guy. And I just tell them I didn't know anybody. You know, I was home raising kids and opening up my stores, and I worked a normal life. And at nighttime, I was this drug dealer. You know?
And all these bricks just get delivered to you. You don't even have to leave Seattle.
Yeah, they were delivered to my safe houses. And then I would go out and confirm the count, and then I would get away from it as rapidly as possible, and then distribution would happen.
What was a typical order?
250 to 350 kilo loads. That's where I was at.
And then what does that take you to turn around? How much time?
Days, week, you know, not that long.
Yeah.
I had really good sources up in Vancouver. They could cash me out for 200 plus kilos in a day. You know, they had that kind of money.
Are these biker gangs, Hell's Angels, or who were they?
Well, you know, I used to be in an organized biker club. I would never talk about any biker clubs, so I'm not going to say that at all. But what I will say is that I did have Russian involvement. I did have an Asian community that picked up from me, from my people.
Okay.
I did have different organizations, and I want to make it real clear now in this interview that in the time that I wore a patch on my back, I was affiliated with Bandidos Nation. I was never asked to spy on them. I never did spy on them. I honored my brotherhood. And I remember when I got my bottom rocker, I was in the Amigos at the time, and down in Panama working a human trafficking case, and we're all sitting in this bar at the end of the day, and one of them goes, hey, Hal just got his bottom rocker. And they all said, you know, that's why we're down here, so Hal and his friends can ride those highways and wear whatever the hell they want. And they actually had respect towards the clubs.
Interesting.
And I've always respected them for that.
Interesting. Yeah. So
well, they weren't involved in my drug business or anything, so there was no. But I wouldn't have spied on anybody like that anyway. I would have turned in a patch.
Wow.
Yeah.
Fascinating. So you were just in this club
as
for me. You.
I loved the brotherhood concept.
Yeah. Wow.
And the brothers, I had a private investigation agency at that time called Surveillance Services Northwest. I sent you a copy of my license, and at that time. When I was in the club, they would want to investigate people getting close to the club that had like hang-arounds and stuff like this. So I did that for the clubs, you know, and I was glad to do it because if somebody was heat or something, maybe I could prevent a murder or an execution or something like that. But I actually had some of my patch holding brothers approach me on the side and say, "Man, you're a freaking mercenary. Can we get into this? I mean, this is really." But I've never admitted that to any club holders because that would get them in trouble. And
so
a long time ago.
So things are going smoothly in the business, as smoothly as they can go. I assume you never have to worry about payment because you've got an army of Sicarios from the other side willing to come up and collect if need be.
I made examples. I did make examples of a few people that were lagging in the business. And I didn't need to call anybody up for that. I was quite capable of dealing with that myself.
Okay.
And with some of my own soldiers, if you will.
Right.
And it's very important that I did dirty my hands in those days because word would get out that, you don't want to do something wrong with these people.
Do most of the bosses from Mexico get their hands dirty on their way up?
That's how we all came up.
Is it kind of necessary?
You don't have a choice. Mm-hmm. That's just how you come up. It's like I said, I got tapped on the shoulder one day and had a guy reach around and pull a pistol out of my hand and said, "Now we trust you." And I was 27 years old.
Yeah.
And when orders come down, there's no such thing as squabbling with the orders.
Have you forgiven yourself?
Absolutely.
Do you think God has forgiven you?
Oh, absolutely. Of course.
I believe that.
I do too.
But that's a terrible, immoral, mortal sin.
No, the sins that I have witnessed in my lifetime and seen are certainly a lot more immoral and a lot more terrible than taking a life. I've seen very, very bad things that I will carry the rest of my life. I feel bad for things I've seen, but it's all part of the journey. When I became interested in becoming a pastor and all that, it wasn't some guy sitting there using it as some kind of shield or something. I truly felt my calling. And at the time that I entered the prison, I decided to take those years and do my seminarial completions. So I was cramming like crazy. And like I said, Johnny Gambino, who threw my feast when I got ordained formally in the prison, everybody around there knew that it wasn't some kind of a game with me. They realized how serious I was. And as a hospice counselor trained by the hospital department there, I would sit in those death rooms at night and watch people die, and I'd be cramming doing my seminary studies in death rooms. And I did 2.5 years of that before I completed. And I think I sent you a page out of my Bible with all their names. And I took 24 fellow prisoners through the dying process. Yeah.
So what year was it that you decided that you'd had enough?
The fall of 1993, I walked into the U.S. Attorney's office with the most powerful attorney in the Pacific Northwest. His name was Murray Gooderson of Culp, Gooderson and Grader, and he handled only organized crime cases. And when I walked in, I was taken to him by a family attorney who had gone to school with him and said, "You're far beyond anything I can ever do to help you, but I know a guy." And Murray Gooderson interviewed me that day and said, "Yeah, I will retain you, and I will make the calls to the U.S. Attorney's office, and I will set it up."
Yeah.
And he said, "But you got to follow through if I do this for you." And we did. When I described to you about that meeting, it was historic.
Right. It had to be shocking to them.
To them, yeah. I made sure I was wearing my 3-piece suit, dripping in gold and diamonds. I walked in giving the impression immediately of just exactly who the hell they had sitting in front of them.
Right.
I didn't want them to compare me to some guy moving 20 or 30 kilos a month type guy. I wanted them to know that they had an underboss in their presence. And they did.
Is that because you wanted them to know that you had the best information?
I wanted them to know that I was putting my life on the line and this was a gambling chip. All I wanted was to not go away for life with no hope for parole. I already had kingpin status. They had it. They had the status on me.
Now, would an option have been to simply quit, to have taken your millions and fled somewhere?
Well, you can't. The cartel would have just hunted me down and killed me for that.
Could they have found you if you would have gone to Europe?
Brother, they can find you anywhere in the world. Believe it.
Really?
Yeah, I dealt with a Spetsnaz officer one time down out of Colombia. I was going down there negotiating 2,500 kilo deal with him. And he told me, he says, you know. And these guys actually had satellite system times on the satellites that were going around the globe. I mean, that's how connected. He was directly involved with the Politburo.
Right.
I mean, that's the kind of people that the cartels have. They have more money than their governments do. They can buy any form of intelligence services. Right. No, I knew I had to root out the people that were coming at me that weren't going to give me my freedom. You know, the love and handshake, it's kind of like the Italian thing. The guy that kisses you is the guy that delivers the death.
And there was no option of saying, giving the business to one of your best workers and telling
That's what I did. I went down there to negotiate their people, taking over command of what I had built for them, for their organization. And they were all in agreement. And I got home to 350 kilos, a third of a ton sitting in my driveway.
And you didn't want
2
that?
days. No, I was down there saying I'm done. And I had made the commitment to my child, to my wife. And
so you think if they hadn't delivered that load, if they would have respected your wishes to step away, you wouldn't have betrayed them?
It wasn't betrayal, it was survival. There's a big difference.
But do you think they would have let you go free?
They didn't. They didn't. Flat out didn't. That was their message.
I see.
I got home to a load waiting for me.
Right.
That was the message. So I like I said, I turned the load around, feigning federal heat, and the next day walked in.
Did you send them the rest of that money, or did you hold on to the money?
I kept a few bucks.
Sure.
I kept what I needed to survive what I was going to go through. Everybody calls that your escape fund. Yeah, you keep a certain amount of money put aside in case you have to try and vanish. But all they do is cut your wife's head off and drop your kids in vats of acid and put it on a film and let the whole world see it, so they know that you will see it eventually. That's what they do.
When you walked into that meeting with your lawyer and the U.S. attorneys, did you know that you were on their radar?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I had an officer on payroll who told me, they're making moves around you pretty rapidly. They knew who I was. They had identified me.
Right. So they recognized you when you walked in?
Oh, my God, yes. It floored the AUSA. Doug Wally was the U.S. Attorney Representative, and it floored him. He just gave me a couple hours, and when we stayed there, and then they took me into this large conference room with a really long table, and all the way down both sides were alphabet agents. CIA, DEA, ATF, IRS, on and on and on. And they're all looking at me, and they're kind of pissed off because they wanted to take me out.
Right.
They didn't want me to walk in, but they never knew really how deep I was with my commitment to them. When I walked in and said, I'll route this thing out for you, I meant every word that I said. And within a few short months, they were cutting me loose into foreign countries with nobody watching me. And I mean, I earned their trust right away.
Okay, so when you say, I'm going to wrap this thing up for you, what do you mean by that?
I meant that I was going to disassemble the Pacific Northwest faction controlled by the cartel that controlled me.
Gotcha. Meaning take down all of their operatives in the area that you once controlled.
Take it all.
Were you going to try to get them... Were you going to try to wrap up people in Mexico as well? Did you make that promise to them?
I did wrap up people in Mexico and further south.
Where?
I was in Central America, a few different countries.
So this is 1993.
Yeah.
Tell us who the bosses are, at this time. Pablo is basically, I think he got killed in 93.
He did. I was in Acapulco undercover with the CIA and DEA doing an operation at the time when Raul Arellano Felix flew in from Bogota, and I was sitting at the table there. I didn't even know he was coming in. Mm-hmm. And he left me a card, and it had his name on it, which was very significant to the DEA and CIA. It was confirmation he was at that meeting. And he was weeping, and he just said, they've killed Don Pablo, and none of us had the TV on. We didn't see it in the news.
Right.
And that was the day it happened. And then, of course, that night we turned it on and watched everything that the world had already seen.
Now, who in Mexico was the biggest target at the time in 1993?
I can say the Sinaloa drug cartel, and specifically lieutenant grade level people, which I got. I got them.
So that would have been...
I didn't take out Chapo or none of the bosses. I was aware that they were target objectives, and I never brought up my village in Durango until 5 years ago when I confessed to a killing that I witnessed as a kid. I protected those that I loved.
So if your goal wasn't to take down the bosses or your village, which I can respect, what was the point of of even doing it?
Great question. It's like the way I built my organization. I had layers of people between me and the actual distribution points to where I was protected. But the bosses in Mexico do the same identical thing. Mm-hmm. So I wasn't getting my kilos from Chapo. I was getting my kilos from somebody a couple steps below him. And those were the targets that we went for, were the targets that I could get closest to.
Right. And so then they wrap those guys up and get them to ideally flip on their boss.
Well, they certainly try, but a lot of people know better because they have families living down there in that country. And we all know what happens to those families.
Okay, so you are now working for the alphabet agencies.
Department of Justice, correct.
Now, the CIA, what presence and involvement do they have in taking down high-level drug targets in Mexico, Colombia, et cetera?
Well, look at the Iran-Contra affair that Oliver North exposed back in the 80s. The CIA, of course, was directly involved in all of that. Mena, Arkansas Airport, things like that. So, the representatives there at that meeting, I can only assess were there knowing full well that I would soon be traveling out of the country. The CIA does not work in America unless they're doing a joint effort operation under the guise of the Department of Justice. Only then can a CIA agent question or act in any capacity. They are the FBI of the world, not of America.
So then how did you deal with them in Mexico? What was their function for you? Were they just a fixer, a courier?
No, joint operations. When I was down there in Acapulco, I was down there, I think that one was a 1,500 kilo deal I was setting up. But that night, the CIA with joint DEA were photographing planes that were coming out of Central America doing parachute drops of narcotics in the foothills. And it was all news to all of us at the same time when Pablo got killed.
Right.
We were down there on other unrelated business. And I remember breaking away from the house and getting to the hotel where the agents were at, sitting in the lobby for hours waiting for them to come in from the field. And when they came and they saw me and they, did the heads up nod, yeah, okay. And the deal was whatever floor they were staying on, I would get off on the elevator to the floor below, walk up the stairs, and then identify myself that way.
I see. So they're essentially just intelligence, just like that's what they do.
Yeah, that's what they were doing.
The Central Intelligence. So when they're working in foreign countries, they're just there to support the DEA in intelligence gathering.
Let's just say the CIA does a little bit more than that, but that's good to go if that's what people want to believe.
No, we want to know the truth. What do they?
Well, the truth is the CIA does whatever the hell they want to do.
They kill people.
Yeah, of course. They are granted immunity. No country can lock up a CIA agent.
Right.
They're diplomats.
Yeah.
And they do what they feel is necessary to do for the preservation of liberty in the United States of America. And I commend every one of them for it.
Yeah. How's that working out now? The entire world's walking away from us.
Yeah. It's the politicians that put us there, not the CIA, brother. And not the military.
So your first foray, your first mission, now that you've turned yourself in, is in Acapulco?
No, that was 15, 16 months after I'd started my first mission. Started in Mazatlan, Sinaloa. Okay. I was under an SAC down there in the office, and that's when I got kidnapped. I was in the SAC special agent in charge of the office. Knew that I had a very heavy meeting going on in Culiacan. It was to meet a general in the Mexican Army at the airport. I would fly by helicopter out to his ranch, do an eyes on 3,000 kilos that my supposed Canadian counterparts were wanting to purchase. And I got snapped off en route to the airport. Was driven off the road, grabbed, bagged, bound with 2 Mexican nationals with me. They didn't make it. When we were taken into interrogation, up until 5 years ago, I've never been honest about that with anybody because I was told by the SAC that if I let them know what they did to me, that it would become a safety issue. My cooperation would stop in that instant, and I would have to face the rest of my life in prison because that was only about 3 months into the 19 months, I believe. I can't remember exactly, but I still had a lot more work to do to work the life sentence down to where I got it down to.
And how much time did you owe them working? Did you have a set amount of time?
I had to earn whatever I could earn from life.
Of course. That's what happens, that you work for them as long as they say.
Yeah. Well, I had a little bit more control than that because they knew how valuable I was to them. They've never had anybody walk in of his own free will, not under arrest and not even under threat of immediate arrest, do what I did. This is a personal vendetta. Had nothing to do with, oh my God, I'm going to go to jail unless I tell on everybody.
Well, it sounds like it because you're working off a life sentence. So it sounds like it was self-preservation.
No, the self-preservation was for my family. It had nothing to do with me. I knew I was going to get killed anyway. You can't go against something like that and not expect death.
Okay, so what was the agreement that you had worked out after that big meeting in Seattle? Let's start there. And
the first thing they did do is not arrest me, but they stamped me on a green card instead of a blue card and said, as of right now, you're cooperating and you're working for the Department of Justice, multiple agencies.
Right.
I had an SRE number with DEA, an SA number with U.S. Customs, and just open files with other agencies. It was amazing to them. I made careers for everybody involved. Two of the agents that I truly love in my heart that went through 30 years with me of my life. Both of them became SACs, one of Seattle, one of Miami-Dade office. And I remember in their retirement getting him texting me, the U.S. Customs guy. He was a greenhorn when he met me 30 years earlier. I was his first case assignment. And he's going, you should be standing here with me, brother. Because I helped get him all the way to the top.
Okay,
and I texted him and I told him, well, I am with you, brother. And that was the last time we communicated.
Okay, so do the bosses down in Mexico, all of the names that we've named, do they know that you flipped?
They didn't at first. They became aware later.
How long did it take them?
A year.
Okay.
Maybe.
So now we're back in Culiacan. You're getting kidnapped.
Yes.
Tell us exactly what happened. The two guys you're with got killed.
Well, what happened was the SAC opened up his big mouth and let agents know in Culiacan that I was a UC working for the Department of Justice. Very agencies telling are on the payroll of the Sinaloa drug cartel. So they made their move, took me out while I was en route to the airport to go meet the general, climb in his helicopter, go look at the load. And they took me to a black site, an interrogation site that's off the map, if your audience doesn't know what that is. I was still bound. They kept the bag on my head as they were beating me. They suspended me in the air, my arms behind my back, ropes. Well, it's hard to talk about it, but ropes lifting me up off the ground while they were beating me, jabbing me with weapons, and then they put a gun to the side of my head and pulled the trigger, cocked it, pulled the trigger, cocked it, pulled the trigger repeatedly. And I started losing the concept of it because I wouldn't give them anything. I did not tell on anybody. I took it, and I was ready for death. And I still live with the certain sound of a click. Puts me into an almost catatonic state to this day. Because every time it clicked, I thought that was it.
Right.
And then I heard English-speaking voices rushing in, and then I remember hearing gunfire, and I remember somebody coming and pulling the bag off my head, and my face was so beaten at the time that I was non-recognizable. And I remember this guy holding a picture of my face in a plastic card, and he was saying, "Are you Hal Bradley? Are you Bradley? Are you Bradley?"
Right.
And I need a second.
It's okay.
Apologies.
That's okay.
I could only shake my head.
Yeah.
And I remember them cutting the straps off me and carrying me to a helicopter and medevacing me out of there. And then I remember the debriefing, and I remember hearing the screams of the two men that were with me, and then their screams stopped. And then I remember nothing. And then I woke up in a medical bed, and I remember at that time the SAC said, well, if you let anybody stateside know what's happened, this will be the end of you working off your case, and you're going to go to prison for life and all this, because he flat screwed up. He put me out there. It was a hard day.